Welcome back with another banger. It's the React Files. Hope you having a good night. Let's get straight to it.
I think I found the most insane Buddhist temple I've ever seen in my life. All of this is from the mountain around it. The inside has been carved. And the guy earlier was singing in here. This place defies modern archaeology in every aspect. Everything we've been taught from history needs to be rewritten. If you look at this right here, the mountain is completely carved from the outside around the temple. 400,000 tons of rock removed and discarded somewhere that we've never even found, but they managed to carve out the entire mountain and build this magnificent temple. It is absolutely stunning. Every single design detail is very meticulous. They even have a water irrigation system that has been working for thousands of years. Think about the water irrigation system. If they didn't plan that perfectly and didn't carve it perfectly, the entire temple would be flooded by the monsoon rains. They have acoustics in here that when you go, it vibrates at certain frequencies that match concert halls in Paris. And people are saying that this place was built in 18 years with chisels and hammers. Think about that for a second. That would mean that 5 tons of rock needs to be removed every hour. Does that make any sense? With you talking about ancient people, just chisels and hammers, removing 5 tons of rock and we still don't know where it is? That is a 100-foot tall pillar that is carved from the same mountain. Imagine how complex that would be to be able to carve a 100-foot pillar. If you made one mistake, the whole thing would crack and fall down. And you know what this pillar means, right? This pillar in Hinduism is designed to connect the earth realm with the cosmic realm. So that's what the whole purpose of it is for. It's 100 feet tall. And they carved around the mountain to make this. One mistake, it's done. It's game over. The sculptures at the bottom of the rock, they have elephants carrying the temple from the bottom of the rock. How in the world did they manage to carve that way and actually reverse engineer the rock? How is that possible? Most modern archaeology, it goes from the bottom up, where they lay out the foundation and then they kind of work their way up. But this one, the top down, literally cut out. Make that make sense. That's way more work. If you actually think about it, that's way more work than building it than finding an empty space somewhere out there and being like, all right, cool, we got an empty space, we're gonna build it up, cool, that's manageable. But they said, you see that mountain over there? I'm gonna carve all across the whole thing and I'm gonna make this insane temple. And that's what they did.
It definitely redefines modern archaeology. Shout out to the Jalen and Tammy show. This is amazing. Kailasa Temple in Ellora, ancient marvel that defies archaeology. It certainly does. Hey, we got to give ancient people more credit for sure. It seems they have some advanced technology. From elephants, I think that's the proof we all need. And he makes a great point. It was harder to build through that mountain than it would be to be on flat ground. So, wow.
Everybody's seen Quetzalcoatl. The one in Africa is much easier to understand how the sea monsters got into the ocean as well as the clams. They were all parasites, even the sea monsters that were eating the boats. All right, here the guy's dying. He's 1,100 miles long or longer, 1,100 miles. They say some of the caves that they can go into, they can have clouds in the caves. They're so freaking big, man. So think of the creatures could have been walking around inside there. And they got to go somewhere, and here's where they went, right out here into the ocean. You see it draining off his head?
Right.
So they went onto the ocean, they started eating the boats. And even the well, everybody knows, everybody's got Google Earth. If you haven't seen this before, come up and look at this giant fish being attacked by the giant dragon, who had just giant parasites like we have.
It's amazing. A lot of the ancient writings have to do a lot with aquatic, a lot of water. A lot of water is involved in a lot of ancient writings. The Bible involves a lot of water.
Yeah.
A lot of water. I don't know, and so.
He said they found caves big enough to have clouds in them. Imagine the type of giants that was in there. Makes me think of King Kong and Hollow Earth. Shout outs to Mud Fossil University. Roger Spur. Bro. Mind bending.
NASA, or Not About Space Administration, is one of the largest con jobs in the history of the world. Archaeology has uncovered ancient hieroglyphics describing our plane of existence. They won't tell you that. This means there was a race of ancient people who understood what we are, and we are not a rock spinning around a star. Their drawings depict magnetism and the top and bottom forces that hold our plane together. The Freemasons knew this, and same with the esoteric religions, with the phrase, as above, so below. This means gravity is debunked, and we are actually being pulled by a magnetic field and not by density. The whole heliocentric model and calculations were actually a brilliant mathematical calculation theory that helped to describe our existence, but it was designed to steer the public away from the truth. Germany realized they could not defeat the bankers' magic, so they had to fight magic with magic using Deutsche Physik, Deutsche physics. They uncovered the truth that all science and mathematics was a decoy and discovered the Kazar's quantum physics theory called Jewish physics. Werner Heisenberg was the leading quantum scientist who discovered the splitting of the atom. Werner von Braun discovered rocket science, all using esoteric magic or quantum physics. Ooh. Ah. Werner Heisenberg purposely stalled the creation of the atom bomb because he felt he would use them immediately and then destroy the planet. Well, we would. This led the U.S. to create it after World War II, when they took the Nazi scientists in Operation Paperclip. Go look it up. The United States adopted the esoteric science and used all of it towards its own advantage. The U.S., after both world wars, was in debt. It needed funding for the exotic science, especially for the anti-gravity and laser weapons we got from the Germans. The government created NASA using Jack Parsons' Jet Propulsion Laboratories to create the magical spells that changed time and space. They needed a target, that the American people, to get behind and fund the project. So they pitched the moon as the goal. We're going to the moon, not because we can, because it's hard. NASA has spent $1 trillion since its inception. Ooh. NASA gets $34 billion a year from taxpayers, yet after we landed on the moon in '69, they've never colonized it. For the next 55 years, they have stalled us with remote control cars on Mars and rumors of train rails on the moon. But most of it is staged. NASA is real and does real science. They have two components to their scheme, however. Compartmentalization. The higher the security clearance, the more you know about rituals, magic, and quantum physics. The lower clearance practices calculus and normal physics. They don't know. NASA claims they have satellites in orbit and do spacewalks. There are thousands of debunkers that show mice, flies, and other earthly animals and insects that seem to get captured on the set, live, while they're up in space. Huh? On Google Earth, you can see Mars as you zoom in on Iceland with what they say is a replica of the Mars rover, and the land looks eerily similar to Mars. There are so many other strange things that NASA has not been able to explain to us. Like, where are the stars when you are in space? They seem to disappear by the time you leave our atmosphere. And how can an object in a vacuum move without another object moving it via density, as burned rocket fuel does not have anything to push against in a vacuum? My God, I'm not a rocket scientist, and yet I understand this. NASA explains this by adding oxygen to the fuel tank to create an atmosphere. If that were the case, they would need all of space to be the atmosphere and not just the area next to the rocket. NASA practices black magic rituals that are deeper than you could ever imagine. Their magic seemed to open up an entire world that should not exist on trigonometry, calculus, and geometry paper. Jack Parsons wasn't an expert in rocket science, yet founded JPL. However, he was a master wizard and studied under Aleister Crowley, the most wickedest man in the world. After his and L. Ron Hubbard's Babylon working ritual in the desert in 1946, they released the 4 watchers under the river Euphrates, whom made a trade with them. Earth's women wombs, yes, their wombs, for technology. In 1953, Eisenhower agreed and signed the paperwork. This happened before, in the Old Testament. Genesis 6, in your Bible, it talks about it. And the first book of Enoch as well. The Watchers used magic to impregnate earthly women with their offspring hybrid known as Nephilim. NASA and the military-industrial complex have been helping the interdimensional beings with their breeding program now for 71 years. Their offspring has been living in caves and underground cities waiting for the opportune time to be released to the public. Again, the same thing happened all before Noah's flood. NASA never was about space because space doesn't exist. The Creator made the first model and called it good. If it was perfect, he would have chose a better word. Good means good enough to use as a test to work out the kinks and bugs. This test model, Earth, exists in the Creator's lab right next to his chair and has been referred to as his footstool. NASA knows this, and their logo depicts who they worship. The original snake's tongue from Genesis who tricked Eve into eating the forbidden fruit. NASA's true motive isn't world dominance. It is trying to gather as much data on its God so it can basically defeat it. This is the fallen angels' conundrum, as man doesn't want a God. They want to be God. They proved this by trying to destroy the world with the first atomic bomb in hopes of a chain reaction of fire continuously. Didn't work, though. There are 3 parties here fighting for control. The Creator, His creation, the first ones, and then us. The people are not ready to hear this because it would trigger madness. So the men of this earth continue to play God by ignoring the angels and the Creator, by lying to you about them while they build a tower that reaches the heavens again so they can escape. NASA, not about space administration.
It suddenly makes sense. They're trying to leave. Shoutouts to Carter James. First time seeing this guy. Saying the quiet part out loud. He was dropping some gems in there. For sure.
We can all agree that them Germans were up to no good. Near a small village in Poland lies the biggest, darkest secret from World War II. This is Die Glocke, also known as the Bell, a super top secret project of history's most hated political party. Disclaimer, I am in no way promoting nor glamorizing this evil party. This is simply information and a bit of speculation that exists on the internet. I'm just talking about it. But this highly classified technological device was rumored to be capable of doing things that are just impossible with our current understanding of science, and is said to have been weapon made during one of Germany's biggest development booms in history, a time that German scientists and engineers were pumping out new inventions left and right. Things like night vision goggles, the Volkswagen Beetle, polyurethane, particle board wood, and even Fanta were all made by 1930s Germany. And they obviously also pioneered many weapons, missiles, and military technology that were groundbreaking for their time. A lot of their more classified projects were developed in top secret underground layers, many of which have actually been uncovered. In fact, the US was so impressed with their technical expertise that they even poached a few of their country's top engineers after the end of the war in Operation Paperclip, where incriminating affiliation and war crimes committed by smart individuals were dismissed in order to let them gain citizenship and work in the States, bringing over 1,000 German scientists into the US, some of whom even led to the foundation of NASA, like Werner von Braun. Now, beyond just impressive weaponry and other technological leaps, the idea of supernatural wonder weapons was also popularized among the German party, with further rumors of them going out to search for ancient sites and artifacts that held secret powers beyond our understanding in the 1930s. Expeditions for the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail, the Spear of Destiny, and many confirmed missions to Antarctica to find who knows what down there. Even a quest to find Atlantis. These guys were obsessed with the occult and the alleged powers of our ancient past. Not surprisingly, they had a bunch of extremely highly classified projects that never saw the public eye, some of which were even revealed decades later. Like in 2000, when Polish journalist Igor Witkowski writes about something that catches people's attention in his book Prawda o Wunderwaffe, The Truth of the Wonder Weapon, which he allegedly gathered from private discussions with wartime intelligence officers regarding highly classified documents from World War II. That would be Die Glocke, the bell, Germany's take on creating their own wonder weapon, using what they've learned from their searches and study of the ancient past. It was shaped like a bell, about 12 to 14 feet tall, with two counter-rotating cylinders inside, filled with a special metallic liquid that was the main source of its power. This liquid was called Serum 525, aka Red Mercury. And the Red Mercury rabbit hole is honestly one of my recent favorites. It's pretty wacky, but I might have to dive into that one soon, so watch out for that. When this bell was activated, it would behave as a sort of UFO, moving around without a propulsion system, and even being able to create a radius of anti-gravity around it. It would allegedly also create a zone of effect around itself that made blood clot and plants die. Oh, and could also teleport people into different dimensions and travel through time, all in one. Obviously, it was a work in progress, otherwise they probably would have won the war, so we sure dodged that bullet. And this wasn't even the first time that mystical occult practices by this party were exposed. Back in 1960, a book in France was written called Le Matin des Magiciens, The Morning of the Magicians, which also wrote about top secret German research projects from WW2, which involved alchemy, parallel universes, extraterrestrial communications, and time travel. This structure found in Western Poland is all that allegedly stands of Die Glocke to this day, a sort of man-made Stonehenge that would have contained the bell inside of it during testing, also locally known as Muchołapka, Polish for Venus flytrap. What we do know is that this structure was part of the larger German Project Reese, a construction project consisting of many underground structures initiated by the infamous party in this exact region of Poland. And the true purpose of Project Reese remains unclear due to lack of documentation and an abrupt end to it when the war was over. This is also where it's said the bell was initially found before being confiscated by the US for further study, rumored to have been transported to America, where they continued its development with all the scientists they brought over from Operation Paperclip. And many people even insist they actually saw the bell falling from the sky during one of its test runs in the 60s, the Kecksburg UFO incident of 1965, where a giant fireball was seen by hundreds of residents in northeastern USA before crashing in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. The US military quickly closed off the area during the time of the crash, and it was speculated to have been a test flight of Die Glocke, with many claiming that the craft they saw was bell-shaped, and is why today a bell monument stands on display near the Kecksburg fire station in memory of this incident. But of course, NASA later claimed that it was a Soviet satellite, Cosmos 96, that fell from space, which was the cause of this fireball. Kinda like when they publicly stated the Roswell UFO crash of 1947 was a weather balloon accident, and we found out decades later that was actually a cover story and they lied. But no, don't worry. It's the government. They're definitely telling us the truth this time.
Die Glocke, Call of Duty Zombies, is based on this conspiracy. Shoutouts to Phil Spixel. Very interesting. I wonder how much magic those scientists from Operation Paperclip do.
Scorpzilla's on the surface.
Scorpzilla's on the surface. And here, I think Jupiter is about to give birth again. You see this?
Yeah.
This is the Great Red Spot. This is only 4 years ago. That's the Great Red Spot sloughing off blood. You see this red stuff sloughing off of here?
Yeah.
They were watching this and they said, ooh, it's going to disintegrate. They thought it's a storm. It's a vagina.
Yeah.
Here it is right here.
You don't look at that. Wow.
That's a vagina, my friend. And that right there is the clitoris, however you want to pronounce it. This is the vaginal canal. You see that little spot right there at the bottom?
Yes.
That's the tag that locks the vagina into the rest of the body.
Okay.
Okay. You see this? This is literally the hairline.
Good gosh.
It goes all the way around.
Yeah.
And that gave birth to to Venus. It's exactly what it says in ancient texts. And this is the size of it, and because Venus is about the size of Earth. If Earth popped out of Jupiter, it would look just like this.
Okay.
Out of that red spot. Now, Venus and all the moons of Jupiter spin backwards. It gave birth to all its moons. It has 12 moons. And it gave birth to all those moons. When they pop out, instead of spinning this way, the way Venus would be, they roll out and roll backwards.
I see. Okay.
So Venus is the only planet. Uranus has a backward tilt to it, but Venus is the only one spinning backwards instead of spinning forwards on its axis.
So Venus and the moons all spin in the same direction, which is counter to the rest of the planets.
Well, in the moons of Jupiter. The rest of the moons don't spin, I don't think.
Okay.
But Jupiter is so big, they spit out a planet. I mean, this is a planet. It's the same size as us. And it almost hit us. And it did actually hit Mars. And I can show you those impact sites. And here it is what it's just like on Earth. Now, here's what's wrong about the people doing this, looking into space. They don't realize, or they can't come to grips with the fact that space is 100% saturated with particles. All right? And those particles have a resistance to them, to the particles that are glued to the Jupiter, to the Earth, to the Moon, everything. They all have a resistance to pushing through them. So what this is doing is Jupiter is spinning. And it's spinning, and which pushes these gases against this mound. All right? This mound is a bump on Jupiter. It's called Venus Mons, and it is the mound of the vagina as well.
Okay.
Venus Mons is the mound of the vagina. It's the dense flesh over the top of the vagina body. And that's what this is right here. It's the exact same thing. Now, as it's spinning through the gases, think of it this. It's not spinning. It's just pushing through. And they are pushing so hard against it, they have to swirl behind it. You see them swirling?
Yes, right.
That's the only reason it's spinning, is they have to swirl past it. It's a big bump. It's a big, huge bump that has to get through all the gases that are being compressed against it. All right, you follow that, right?
Right.
All right, now let me show you something. Hold on a second.
Scorpzilla is on the surface. You follow that, right? Shout out to Roger Spur. Mouthboss University having a webcam session, mentioning once again what we heard in one of them videos back when he was talking about this. It's humorous when you hear it out loud, but what he's showing is as if things kind of click. I can't explain it. Welcome to the crazy side of TikTok.
This is a wood gasifier that I built a couple of years ago. It's actually an improvement on a first design, so this is version 2 where I think I have most of the bugs worked out. I was thinking that there might be some interest in seeing how I built it and how they work. And if you're not familiar with the gasifier, this is in fact your first time hearing the word, then don't worry, I'll go into that. Gasification is essentially controlled pyrolysis, and what pyrolysis means is the expedited decomposition of a material through heating. So the way that this works in our case is we have a material, for example, wood chips, but you can use any sort of organic carbonaceous biomass. I'm just using wood pellets because they're convenient. They're already bone dry, and I don't have to do any work in preparing them. But you can also use any sort of dry organic material. So wood is obviously a go-to option because it's readily available and also energy dense. But you can also use paper. You can use coal, you can use dried leaves, you can use dried horse manure. Really, any dry, organic, flammable mass will work just fine for producing our syngas. So what is syngas? Syngas is the product of what's left over after we pyrolyze our medium down here. And on average, it's composed of about 20% hydrogen, 20% carbon monoxide, and between 50 to 60% nitrogen, which is a little bit of methane in there by weight. And of course, all that we're left over with down here is almost pure carbon. When you burn a pile of wood on the ground, for example, you're only using up about 1/3 of the potential energy of that firewood. And the remaining 2/3 goes up in the air in the form of flammable gases that haven't flashed off yet. And so essentially the principle for this is allowing that to happen in an oxygen-deprived environment, and then taking those leftover gases, filtering them, cooling them, getting all the contaminants out and most of the water, and then we can use that gas left over to power an internal combustion engine, or just to burn for lighting, cooking, or a number of other things. So this piece is really where all the magic happens. This is called the burn bowl or shaker grate, depending on who you're talking to. And in my case, it's just a stainless steel bowl with holes drilled through the bottom for ventilation, so these wood pellets under here, not just the surface pellets, are reacting, so we're getting more gas and a more efficient process. So all this is something to hold our material for it to burn in, where it can also be exposed to air. This is called the fire tube, and the diameter of this and the length of this is important in calculating how much gas you'll be able to produce, and thus how big of an engine you'll be able to run. In my case, with this being, I think it's around a 4 3/4 inch fire tube, I'll be able to run about a 20 to 25 horsepower engine, which should more than power most generators out there for home use. So after we're through with the flame tube, all we have left to do is store fuel that can be fed by gravity into the shaker grate eventually. And so I've got this half a Freon can that you can see with some sheet metal just to seal it all up, and then reduces it down to this size. And then I needed more storage, so I simply welded this 5-gallon propane tank on top, added a simple lid. Of course, it's important with a lid, since you'll be drawing air through the system via this fan, which I'll get to later. You have to have a place for air to enter, so make sure you don't seal it up completely. Obviously, this isn't a complete setup, because if I were to burn anything in this, the gases would simply escape out into the environment, and I would get absolutely no use out of them. So as an ash catch and a containment vessel, I'm using this other Freon can that I just have the top cut off of. That, as you can see, has these latches, which form up on these here, and a gasket running along the inside of this to seal up against this surface, so we have an airtight system, which is also another thing that I need to mention, because it's very important to have a completely airtight system in gasifier, because what can happen is that can lead to a dangerous stoichiometry, or the mixture of fuel to air, that could result in an explosion. So be very, very careful if you were to replicate this, and I would encourage you to do lots and lots of research before attempting to. So we've got the fire tube, we've got the burn grate, and we also have an ignition port. This is where you'll start the gasification process by igniting the carbon from a previous burn. The first startup of a gasifier is always the most difficult, because you have to ignite the material. You don't have the assistance from the leftover carbon. So after the first burn, you're left with this nice combustible base that you can simply ignite. There's one other component that you should have on a stationary gasifier. And I say stationary because aside from running home generators, you can also make them large enough to power a full-size vehicle. And in a moving vehicle, you don't need this shaker grate to move, because the motion of the vehicle is enough to sift down the already spent ash and such. The carbon that's no longer useful and inhibiting airflow will be agitated by the motion of the vehicle and just fall out into your catcher case, in my case this. So in a stationary gasifier, you have to have a way to agitate this every so often. You'll notice it's suspended by chains, one link welded up here, and then just bolted here. As you probably noticed, this does not have a way to externally agitate this, and I found that it isn't entirely necessary. I can run this for a very long time, and it seems to do a well enough job of cleaning itself out without my input. So as far as actual construction goes, it's mostly made of Freon cans. So I've got this one here, as I said, this piece of sheet metal, reducing it down to this size, and then this taper. So this tube goes all the way down to here and does not stop. This is just a collar over it, made of the removed top of a Freon can with a hole the same size as the external diameter of this tube, and another can lid turned over and welded to make sort of a patty shape right underneath of here. And then I took a piece of flat bar, and you can see the difference in the seam. You can see the seam between the two halves of the Freon can and the seam between the flat bar that I welded on. The purpose of this flat bar is to offer a surface to support the sides of this container. And because I have the nice taper, the inside of that Freon can, it guides it right into this channel between the two, which I have inserted a piece of fiberglass wood stove gasket into to give it a nice airtight seal. Okay, now you can see I've got that cover back on. I've got the grate closed. And the only purpose for this is just to keep hands away from the burn tube, because it does get fairly warm, and I don't want anything flammable coming into contact with it. And of course, I don't want somebody to touch it with their bare hand. And it's just being held closed with this spring that I bent to a nice shape that made it somewhat ergonomic. As you can see, these draw latches hold this in place and also press it firmly against the gasket lining the inside. And I've never once noticed a leak around this seam. So I think that covers most of this part, which is technically called the reactor, which is really where all the important stuff happens. But we can't use the gas produced by this yet because it's too dirty, too full of water vapor, and it'll reduce the life of our engine. So what we're doing is we're filtering it with these two filters out here. And here's our outlet from the reactor. It's just 1 1/4 inch steel pipe. And you want the place where the gas draws relatively high in your reaction chamber, because you want the contaminants, which are generally heavier, to stay down, and the lighter elements like the hydrogen will float up into here. And of course, we'll still be drawing up a lot of ash, a lot of carbon, a lot of other things, but we'll filter those out a little bit later, starting with this, which is a simple cyclone filter made of another Freon can. So I have this going in at an angle. So what happens is the gas goes there, and then it spins along the sidewalls all the way down until it gets drawn out by this, the draw tube, which sits just a couple of inches from the bottom, and the cool sidewalls of the cyclone filter condense out a lot of the water and tar that you would find in your fuel, especially if you're using something like wood that's not completely dry. And there will be quite a bit of tar produced as well, and this will help filter some of that out. And as the sides get wet and from the water and sticky from the tar, they also trap a lot of the particulate material simply just by adhesion. And of course, as those liquids and the tars build up, gravity will pull them down, and then they'll follow this taper into our collection jar. And you can see, oh, that's stuck. And you can see I have this rain that's quite a bit. There's just a little bit of that nastiness down there on the bottom. But because I'm using wood pellets that are just pressed together, there's really not a lot of garbage in there that needs to be filtered out. So very little production. Either that or my filter doesn't work. Okay, next up after that, gets drawn out from down below in the cyclone filter, goes up, goes into here, which is where hopefully a lot more of the cooling is going to take place, because we really want to get all of the water that we can out of our gas before it gets to our engine. So this is just a simple radiator made out of 2-inch rectangular tubing and then 1-inch pipe. So obviously the operating principles are quite simple. Gas just goes up, cools on the way up, and of course a lot of those heavier gases, we want mostly hydrogen in this, and hydrogen of course is the lightest element, so having this be as tall as possible can actually be beneficial to our gas production process, and that's really all there is to it. Next we move on to the blower, which is a very vital part or setup, because when you get a gasifier running, the vacuum of the engine pulling, on the intake stroke of the piston, where it goes down and draws in fuel, a vacuum is created, and then it pulls air through our gasifier system, so there is no external power needed for this to function once the engine is running. But in order to get it to that state, we have to have a way to pull the gas through. And of course, it's quite a complicated system with lots of turns, lots of restrictions, so we're going to need quite a powerful air pump to do so. So this one I just made myself. I have some HVAC duct, so it's quite thin, but it's more than good enough. It's just pop riveted together. Obviously, I came up with a pattern, put it on paper, traced onto the metal, cut it out with a nibbler cutter, leaving tabs, bent them over, and then pop riveted it together. And of course, that's not going to be quite airtight, so I added some wood stove sealing tape, and I think it turned out quite nice. As far as the blower itself, this is salvaged from a 1992 Dodge Dakota. This was just a temperature control blower that pushed air around your cab to keep it cool or warm. Now the nice part about this is it's a 12-volt fan, so you can run it off of a battery. So in the event of a power outage, you're not going to have 120 volts to start this thing up. That would be kind of counterintuitive. So make sure, if you replicate this, think about these things and go with the 12-volt motor. And of course, it's just strong through the system, pushing out this tube, which I have going to this piece of 1-inch pipe here. That's just being held in place with this hose clamp. And of course, the reason for this is I can light this on fire and the metal won't burn like the tubing will. This is just a clear braided hose that I picked up at my local hardware store, and I was worried about how corrosive the gases were that were being produced by this and whether or not this would hold up. But in the couple of years that I've had it, I've run it quite a few times and I've had no issues. It doesn't feel brittle. It's still soft. It is quite cold out, so it's not as soft as it could be. But once it warms up, you'll see. This is just a barb the size of the hose that I threaded into the sheet metal here. And now we're going to start it up. I'll walk you through that process, and we're going to see if we can run that generator. So this cage is on a hinge on that side, so you can see I can just remove the spring, swing it right open, and have access to my ignition port there. Okay, so there's sort of a universal starting sequence to most gasifiers out there. It's a pretty complicated high-tech process, but I think you can bear with me. Newspaper. Good old newspaper. So we're just going to roll it up, flip it down in our ignition tube, and that is all set. Remember, I've got leftover carbon from previous burns, so this should take right off as soon as I get the motor going and ignite the end of this. Okay, our newspaper is in place. Next step is to turn that fan on so we can start pulling air through. With any luck, since this has less resistance than pulling air through all of this material, it should draw air in through here and pull that flame down into our carbon. Okay, our battery is connected, putting it to our fan. You can hear it's running currently. There we go. You can see we've already got smoke being produced at the end over there. And we're going. That's what things look like down inside of our shaker grate right now. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and cap this back off. And we're going to close our safety grate here, fasten it with our spring, and we're all set to go. It's been about 3 minutes. We're getting close, but we're not quite there yet. I'll do a quick demonstration to show you guys just how well this filter setup works. Down here, you can see that's quite hot. The water is beating up, falling off, evaporating, steaming, you can see it. Here, same deal, quite hot. We go to the top of this, however, no reaction. As a matter of fact, I can touch this with my bare hand, no issue. It's amazing what can happen in that short distance there. One more very important thing that I forgot to mention. It just occurred to me as I was sitting here waiting for this to start producing gas for about 20 minutes. make sure your fuel is completely dry. And I thought I was in the clear, but there was some old fuel in the fire tube left over from the last time I used this that was soaked. You can see it just turns into this complete mush. So I cleaned it out, restarted it, nothing's changed. We're starting to produce gas now. And while we're here, why don't we just give it a shot? Hey, see that? That is fire good. So as this heats up a little bit more, eventually we'll have a sustaining flame here that won't need the assistance of a blowtorch or a lighter. See that? Okay, so obviously the gas coming out is still quite thick. And that's because to get every bit of contaminant out of this, we're going to need a lot more of a complicated system than what I have. But as you can see, all it needs is this to be clean enough to burn. Tell me the truth. And we've got sustaining flame. You can see the volume this produces is quite substantial. And one thing I forgot to mention is that the tube running from your blower down to your engine or whatever you have running off of this is also going to act like a condenser. So you will have some liquid buildup in there. So be mindful of that. If you were using this for home installation, you actually had a unit that was installed there and already hooked up to a generator, that's just one thing that you need to be aware of. The longer of a run you have from your gasifier to your generator, the better off you'll be and the more fluid that you'll be able to condense out of your gas. Okay, we've got flammable gas. Now it's the moment you've all been waiting for. We're going to try to start this generator here. And the way I'm going to do that is simply by blowing the gas into the intake of the carburetor. Move that till just a second so you can actually see. Ordinarily you'd have this piped straight into the carburetor with a T and another valve coming out to the side. So you would adjust the gas and the airflow from the outside to get a perfect stoichiometry to get your engine to run the best it can off this gas. So it's sort of like a primary carburetor, if you will. But for now, we're just going to do that, and that should work.
That's it.
So we are officially using wood throughout this contraption, the gasifier, out of that hose and onto the generator. I don't have the fuel line hooked up just so you know it's 100% running off of the pig gas. That's it. Okay, I think that's just about it. In this video, I covered how I built it, how gasification works, and the end product. You can see how much flame is being produced here. A substantial amount for the small amount of wood that will be consumed to generate that. So I hope you found this video interesting at the very least, or maybe I piqued your curiosity, and you'll either build one for yourself or do a little more research into the technology, because this stuff has been around for hundreds of years. In the 1800s, gasification was used mostly with coal as a fuel source to produce town gas for cooking and lighting. So this has been around for a very long time. I don't know why more people don't know about it. I think this is an awesome technology, and I'm trying to bring it to the attention of more people because I think it can be utilized specifically from a preparedness standpoint, because as you can see, I'm surrounded by fuel. So no matter what, I will always have something to generate electricity while having this around, and that's a really comforting thought.
That's a very comforting thought. That is amazing. A wood stove install. See, I feel this is the knowledge they don't want us to know about. I definitely want to learn more about gasification, for sure.
You know what I said about light. Light is literally water. Light is a liquid. And water is made out of light, just as we are made out of light as well. You're made out of the exact same particles, that muon, electron, neutrino, right down the board. So everything is made from that. And the earth is literally eating light. The plants eat the light when it comes to them. That's what they...
Well, I know the Earth is, a lot of ancient texts talk about, I never used to think this way, about Earth being alive. Got it. And I believe that now. I never used to, but what I find and what I see, absolutely 100%. And even a lot of, I get into a lot of people that travel, soul travel, and do things like that, get into the supernatural, things that can't be explained by human minds, human eyes. I do a lot of that because a lot of that goes on. And that's who we're ultimately going to be in the end when we pass from this life and are released into better sailing in the next life to come. So I really get into what's coming up.
I know you do. I know you.
I really get deep into where we're all going.
Well, I know that you've studied it very deeply. I know you have.
I'm so deep into some things right now that I can't even share with people because it's...
They go crazy. People take it as an assault. People take these things...
Their minds have just become such a trap for them.
Exactly.
And it's actually a type of bondage of slavery. It really is, because they're actually trapped in their own mind and they can't be set free. There's so many... I mean, you can actually...
Well, you know how we've talked about menticide.
Right.
Once you're programmed a certain way, unprogramming is difficult, first of all. And secondly, if you step up and speak, they will crush you.
Right.
And they have the authority to do that. Right. They are your professors, they're your teachers, they're your dictators, they're your politicians, they're the people that tell you what you have to think and say in order to be accepted in society.
Exactly.
And that's a wrap. Hope you enjoyed tonight's rabbit hole. If you enjoyed this video, why don't you check this one right here. Thanks again. Till next time.